And we are live.
All right, this is what episode is this? 8 or 9? Ninth episode of the long trip. We got a guest here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing with the school and just
Okay,
kind of
you
like
probably want to start with my name, right?
yes,
I am
please.
Dr. Jeannie DiClementi. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I have active psychologist licenses in both Indiana and in Colorado. I've maintained my Colorado license all these years. I go back and do consulting work and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on the faculty of the psychology department here at Purdue, Fort Wayne, and
Yeah.
I've been here since 2001. I got here just about a couple of weeks before 9/11. In fact, my first real introduction to the Fort Wayne community at large was on 9/11. News media was looking for somebody to go on their newscasts and talk about trauma and how you talk to your kids about, things like 9/11. And that was, and they had, I think they'd called the psychology department, and the people there knew my background. My background before I came to Indiana was I did a lot of trauma work and victim assistance work. I was one of the mental health responders after the Columbine shootings.
Really?
I was there. I was there the next day, and over the next few weeks, work with victims. Some of them were the students that were barricaded in the school all day. Some of them were their family members. Some were their neighbors. I had one man I worked with, for example.
Can you take your mic in just a little bit
Little
closer?
bit?
Yep.
Okay.
Right there. Perfect.
One of
Thank you.
one of the men that came in looking, he was very, very distraught because one of the deceased students had mowed his lawn every summer for about the past 4 summers, and he knew the kid real well, and that kind of thing. So
People were not only the victims, but the close people of them.
it affected everybody in the Denver metro area, and students at other schools and so forth. And actually, I'm probably getting a little tangential here, but actually, interestingly, I was also teaching at the University of Colorado, the Denver campus. And so over the next 3 years, I would get students in my classes that had graduated from Columbine and that had been in the school that day. And then they graduated and they were going to college.
And you worked with them
and
there
so,
too?
So I had some of them. They ended up in some of my classes. I remember one day a fire alarm went off in the building. Somebody had pulled a fire alarm, and it completely freaked out this one poor student because she'd been hiding under a desk with some other students for probably 5 hours that day at Columbine, and the fire alarm was going off the whole time. Nobody ever shut it off, and so fire alarms was a trigger for her.
Yeah.
For her post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And so that had a horrible, long-lasting effect.
I bet.
Yeah, in fact, all of those students are grown adults now, and they had their family. And this was it's been 19 years, and so they're all in their maybe 30s, 40s. I'd have to do some math, but anyway, and maybe have their own families, but they still talk about, they still have nightmares, and they still feel the effects of what happened. So that's
19 years later, yeah.
right. So that's what I had been doing prior to coming to Purdue Fort Wayne, and so on the day of 9/11, when they were looking for somebody who had some measure of expertise on dealing with trauma, my name came up. So that was sort of my introduction, I guess, to the Fort Wayne community, was
some introduction.
Talking, yeah. And since then, I mean, I do get called. I do get called once in a while. I think the one that really sticks out in my mind was the Sandy Hook, the massacre, the young man that went in and murdered all the children in the elementary school, and I spent the whole weekend, and not just talking to the media, but talking to people. People were calling me and how do they tell their kids, because the kids saw it on TV and they're afraid to go to school and that kind of thing. So,
yeah. So is there like levels of trauma?
Well,
compared to, like, say before we got started, you were talking about like the trauma of if I was robbed.
Traumatization, the effects that it has on you. Sure, there's depending on it sort of depends on how close you are to the actual event. So, and using the example when we were talking before, if you're the victim of a robbery, let's say somebody holds you up at gunpoint, you are the primary victim. You're experiencing primary traumatization. Somebody who maybe witnessed this happening, or they were in the alley with you, or they were in the store when the robbery took place, or whatever. They weren't directly impacted because the gun wasn't pointed at them, but they were still very much affected. They're secondary victims. Your family members. You go home and say to your spouse, or your parents or your siblings, I was just held up at gunpoint and he was going to shoot me in the head. They're also secondary victims. They experience secondary traumatization. And then the rest of us out there who may read about it in the newspaper, or see it on television or online, that's sort of the tertiary level of traumatization. We're removed from it, but it can still have an impact on us. And taking that bit from my direct clinical experience over the years, after last winter, after the Las Vegas massacre, where the man was shooting from the hotel room, and the media was just saturated with news reports while it was happening. And then for days and weeks after it happened.
Months, really.
Well, and it's still, it still comes up every once in a while.
Yeah.
Something else comes up. So I put together a survey that asked people how many hours a day, or total hours they've spent either watching news reports about the massacre, reading about it, reading about it on social media and that kind of thing. And then I also assess them on their levels of distress, whether it's symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And what I found was that there is, yes, definitely a strong relationship between number of hours spent through media exposure. I'm calling it media exposure.
Okay.
So number of hours they spent and their level of distress. So in other words, which is, I think it's common sense, but the more hours they spent focusing on, reports about this, the greater their distress was. And regardless of their mental health background, I also assessed their mental health background.
Really? So
Yeah.
it didn't matter. The more hours you were online in media exposure, the more
distressing, the more distressed. And it's removed from being the actual victims. These are the people that are reading about it. These are the people clear across the country. And we had...
Where all did the survey get done? Was
all
it
over the country.
It was an online survey?
I put it out online. And I'm trying to remember now how many states were represented, but I had people from most parts of the country.
Really?
That responded to the survey.
That's fascinating. That's just crazy. But it makes sense. Like, that's why I can't watch the news anymore. I just keep watching it, and it's just they're reporting all the bad things that are going on, and you can't listen to that all day every day, or some people watch the news right when they wake up. I can't do that. That's a horrible way to start my day.
Well, yeah, and I don't think people realize that something that happens on the other side of the world, or on the other side of the country can have an impact on you. When the Pulse nightclub shooting, the gay nightclub in in Florida.
Yeah.
We actually set up emergency crisis counseling available for people here down at the Positive Resource Connection. I want to make sure I get the name right. Positive Resource Connection, which is a local AIDS service organization. We borrowed one of their offices and set up an office to do crisis counseling, and I did crisis counseling for people because they were affected. They were very much affected by that particular hate crime.
I could imagine, because so it's just fascinating to me to think that the thing that's connecting us all, like through all over the world, is just, it's honestly kind of hurting us in the same way. You're saying that it's making us more distressed, more we're connected through all these things that we can find out that's happening clear on the other side of the world.
Well, and stop and think about it. Let me just use these two situations as examples: the Las Vegas shootings and the Pulse nightclub shootings. First of all, the Pulse nightclub shooting clearly was a hate crime.
Yeah.
What makes a hate crime worse, almost worse than a random shooting, is that those victims were chosen because they belonged to a particular community, which means anybody that belonged to that community could have been chosen. Okay, they're vulnerable. It means, in other words, it has a ripple effect. The whole community is affected, which is why the whole gay and lesbian community was affected by that shooting, and so we saw people in all different corners of the country, including here in Fort Wayne, traumatized by that shooting. That that could have been me. I mean, it could have been any gay club. He's targeting gay people. The Las Vegas shootings were traumatizing people because it was random, and so anybody on the street, he picked this shooter picked a venue that had a lot of people packed in together. It made them easy targets that could just as easily have been a football stadium, some kind of a get together on a college campus. It could have just as easily been any of that. So that made, again, everybody vulnerable, and people don't like to be vulnerable, and it makes us anxious and makes us fearful. And so that's the ripple effect that these events have on people, and it has an impact on their mental health.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like you said, no one would ever suspect the ripples to be affecting that far out, clear on the other sides of the world. So, what made you kind of want to get into this kind of line of work in field of study?
You mean, why did I choose to be a psychologist when I grew up?
Yeah.
That's a
too personal of a question?
Well, no, it's not personal. It's hard to answer. Because I've been doing this for like forever. But I think I've always had a curiosity about people and what makes them tick, and so it's a natural to go into a field like psychology.
Yeah.
And once I was getting through my undergraduate work, I became more and more attracted to the clinical side of things. What difference between normal and abnormal? What's the difference between mental health and mental illness? And that kind of thing. So that's where, because there's many subfields in psychology. There's developmental, there's cognitive, there's industrial organizational, and so forth. But I drew more toward clinical because I became much more focused on sort of normal versus abnormal and health versus illness.
What do you mean by normal versus abnormal? Normal, like sociopath kind of thing?
No,
or
let me normal, when we refer to somebody as being normal, that's basically a statistical term.
Okay.
Normal, that's just, they fall in sort of the average, they're the average person based on normal distribution, the old bell curve.
Yeah.
And anybody that does not fall into the middle, that they fall into the tails of distribution. In other words, their behavior is
the outliers.
The outliers. Their behavior is not at all frequent. It's very rare. It's rarely seen. That makes them abnormal. Unfortunately, as a society, we place value judgments on normal versus abnormal.
Yeah.
What's something that's rare is seen as pathological. And so we had a joke when I was working in psych hospitals. We had a joke about the way that you could tell the patients from the staff, as the staff had the most keys. Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's a very, very fine line in a lot of cases between normal and abnormal, between health and illness.
Yeah. I never really thought of it that way.
So, for example, the issue of hearing voices. Okay, we typically think of somebody who hears voices in their head that's associated with a schizophrenia, for example. But every single person on this earth has heard a voice in their head at some time or another. I mean, have you ever thought somebody said something to you?
Yeah.
Or you thought, I thought somebody called my name, and you turn around, there's nobody there. Okay, it's a random couple of brain cells firing.
Yeah.
But how do you know you're not schizophrenic?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I would think
That's
it's because
what I
it's
mean
not
by
like
the
a
fine line.
reoccurring thing,
Right, and it's not reoccurring, and of course to be diagnosed, you have to have a whole lot of other symptoms.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the line. There's a really
Yeah, I
fine
see your
line.
point. Yeah,
There's a really fine line between health and illness, which brings us to the issue of then why are people with mental illnesses so stigmatized in our in our society. I was thinking about this when I was driving over here today, that if somebody who catches a cold or breaks a leg or gets cancer, we don't look at them as though they're morally deficient. Do we?
Yeah.
We look at them with empathy and I hope you get better and everything. But somebody who has depression or an anxiety disorder or some major mental illness like schizophrenia, society tends to look at them as though they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
It's a weakness. They've made the gods angry. Whatever.
No, yeah, I completely
whatever your
agree,
perspective is.
Yeah.
And so really, there's really a fine line between so-called physical illnesses and mental illness. I mean, they all have their origins in our biology.
Yeah, you're right.
But yet we stigmatize people with mental illness to the point where they keep it secret. They're reluctant to get treatment, because they buy into that.
Well, both, which is crazy because both have an impact on your physical well-being.
Well, yeah.
Completely.
Let me tell you a story about a training I was doing quite a number of years ago, and I hadn't thought about this in years until I was driving over here today. It's been years ago. I was training a group of victim advocates who work with domestic violence victims in these small rural communities in the mountains of Colorado, because this is where I'm from, and this is where I did my training in my early career. And what these victim advocates would do would they'd go with the police officer to the scene of a domestic violence, and they try to get the victim into a shelter, trying to get the victim some services and so forth, get her or him away from their batterer.
Yeah.
And so we were doing some training on, what to do, what to say, and so forth. And I had this group, and there were two of us during the training, and we were doing role plays, different situations to help them so that they, get familiar with and more comfortable with dealing with unpredictable situations. And so I had this, this was a male-female couple, and I had the female, she was going to role play the battering victim. And so I had her, I gave her an assignment, so he didn't, the volunteer that was role-playing the victim advocate would know, but I wanted her to sort of drop some hints that things were hopeless and helpless, and to try to get him to ask the suicide questions, because that was going to be part of their job.
Yeah.
Because these their mental health professionals in in the rural mountain communities are few and far between. At least they were, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So so they start into their role play, and she's dropping these hints. I feel so helpless. I don't know if I can go on like this. I don't even want to see tomorrow. Sort of some of the vague things that I had given her, and he wasn't getting it. He was not. He just wasn't responding. And finally, out of desperation, she just said to him, "I am so depressed." And he said to her, and I quote, "No, you're not." And she looked at him, and she looked over at me, and I looked at my co-trainer who was sitting across the room. We looked at each other. She says, "Yes, I am." And he goes, "No, you're not." She finally said, "What do you mean I'm not?" He says, "You're not depressed. It's just a chemical imbalance in your brain." Those were his exact words.
Really?
Okay. Apparently this guy had read an article or taken a class and learned about neurotransmitters, brain chemicals,
Yeah.
right? And he was convinced that there was he became convinced in his own mind that there was no such thing as depression. It was just this imbalance, and all you had to do is get the chemicals back in balance, and because there was really no such thing as depression. So I tried to explain to him, everything we think, say, do, all the ways we behave, they all have a basis in our brain. There's always an action of neurotransmitters. There's always electrical activity. There's always communication between the different structures of the brain. I mean, and he wasn't getting it. He was convinced that there was no such thing as, we never let him go out with victims.
Yeah,
Okay.
I could imagine after that.
He spent his volunteer year doing clerical work in the office.
Yeah.
But it brings me to a point that people don't understand the relationship between the so-called physical and the so-called psychological. They seem to think that they are two completely different things, separate and not related.
Yeah.
And that if you doctors do this too, if you can't see it under a microscope or you can't see the real physical evidence, then it must all be all in your head.
Yeah.
Well, I got news for everybody. It's all in your head anyway, because you can't separate the psychological from the physical when you're talking about human behavior, the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, a victim is depressed, and yes, her neurochemicals are involved, but that's not the point. The point is she's depressed.
Yeah.
And so we get this. I try really hard in my classes to teach students that there really isn't, to try to get away from this myth of the mind-body split.
Yeah.
They are actually all just one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
The physical is the psychological, and the psychological is the physical.
I see what you're saying.
Why do people get sick during finals week? Did you ever get sick during finals week?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember being an undergraduate. I'm trying to remember the times when I took finals when I wasn't running a fever. Well, you're stressed. The stress is psychological. I have to get those A's. I have to get my papers turned in. I have to study for this test. Blah blah blah. That has a direct connection from your cortex to your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and your adrenal system and your immune system. It's all very interrelated, and your immune system gets suppressed because of the stuff that's going on up here in your brain, and the opportunity arises, you get exposed to a bug, boom, you're sick. It's very, very, very connected.
You're right.
And so that's why I say mental illness, there is a fine line, if a line at all, between mental illness and physical illness.
Yeah. I would go so far to say that there really isn't a line at all, because like you're saying, every time that someone is mentally ill or even down, they're just more prone to physical illnesses. It happens. It's been proven with many studies. They just have more prone to diseases, or just anything can happen to them. Their body on their insides is just not working right in one little thing.
Well, and too many times there've been. I'm thinking of a couple of disease syndromes. I was in graduate school. I worked with some researchers on at a hospital in Denver on chronic fatigue syndrome. Um, and chronic fatigue syndrome was they called it the yuppie flu years ago. This is probably before your time, Ted.
Yeah, I've never heard of this.
Yeah, but anyway, it's characterized by extreme debilitating fatigue that reduce your activity level is cut in half. Um, Joint pain and muscle pain without any evidence of inflammation. Some short-term memory problems.
So you're just hurting with
You're
no
hurt,
signs
you hurt all
of...
over. It feels like a really awful case of the flu, but they could not find any physical markers for it. Doctors could not find, researchers. And so what the doctors were telling their patients, when their patients were going in, complaining of these, that either they were faking it, they were imagining it, or they were crazy.
That's nuts.
It's just really depression. You're just depressed. And of course, you put them on antidepressant medication, and they weren't getting better. And so now they're finding, since then, they have found some, and I'm not up on the latest literature, but they have definitely found markers in the immune system that this really is a genuine, real physical disease. Well, we know it was. It's just
well,
that
they
which
wouldn't have
part,
been going
which
to
part
the
of the body,
doctor.
right? Which part of the body?
Yeah.
Um,
That's just crazy that like they were hurting, basically what you're saying, with their joints and everything, but no sign of inflammation or any physical proof that they were hurting.
Chronic pain is another one. People who have chronic back pain, that's probably one of the most common types of chronic pain. And chronic pain is generally defined as pain. It has its origins in an injury, but it's pain that continues on after the injury is resolved, after the healing is complete.
Yeah.
But they still feel the pain. Well, what's happened is, I mean, the person is really experiencing it. It can be really debilitating pain. It really does have its origins in the nervous system. They are still getting real pain signals, and they're not making it up.
No.
But people think that, people accuse them, again, of malingering. You just want to get out of going to work, or you're drug seeking and you want to get some more Vicodin this month, and that kind of thing. But it really, really is genuinely experienced. You just can't see it under a microscope.
Yeah. Which is crazy. That's just, I've never even heard of anything like that where they were just hurting like that, but there's no signs. And then
there's I think we could divide pain into probably roughly two categories. There's nociceptive pain, which is pain that's originating from actual tissue damage, an injury. And then there's neuropathic pain, in which the pain is originating from the nerves themselves. And I'm not going to launch into a long lecture on chronic pain, but it's like the pain signals can't shut off. There's some mechanism in the nervous system that even after the injury is healed, for some people it can't shut the pain signals off. The pain is real. Phantom limb pain is another one. Have you ever heard of phantom limb? Somebody that has a
you've heard of it?
Has a severe injury, and they have to have an amputation. So let's say they get the leg amputated. They still feel the leg.
Oh, okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
And they still experience the pain from the leg, even though the leg's no longer there.
Yeah.
Why? Where do you experience pain? Up here. And so what's happening is there's no feedback loop, and it's still operating without the other end of the feedback loop. So they continue to experience sensations that have been...
How would you go about fixing that, though?
Well, sometimes you have to fool the brain. There's
That's what I was wondering if
there's
it was
there's a neurologist in California, and I've shown his videos to my students before, but he and they claim this works, but if you okay, let's say somebody has had an arm amputation, and what they're experiencing is in the phantom pain is that their fist is clenched so tight that it's just extremely painful. They can't unclench it because the fist no longer exists.
Yeah.
But it exists in their brain. So what if you get a mirror here, you have them look at the mirror, and it's almost like they're fooling their brain into thinking they've got both arms.
So
see what I'm doing?
okay.
So they're using their right arm, and so you loosen the right arm like this, and the theory is that then it fools the brain into thinking that.
That's fascinating.
Now, I'm not sure what the research is on that, and some people will swear by that, but there are other techniques. There are other hypnosis, self-hypnosis. I'm trained to do hypnosis for pain management, and that can be really powerful, and that has to do with a lot of blocking pain signals. And so there's those kinds of things. What doesn't work on those types of things are narcotics.
Yeah.
Narcotics really are not effective for that kind of thing.
What really are they effective for when it comes to depression and?
Well, I'm talking about pain. Narcotics for pain management.
So like
they
morphine.
They're more on. It's more on short term immediate, like post-surgical pain.
Okay.
Where there's actual, but narcotics. I don't know that narcotics really have an impact on pain that's originating in the nervous system. The neuropathic.
Yeah, I would feel like it wouldn't. How's it gonna help
But,
numb the pain in an arm that ain't there?
Yeah. So anyway, there medications for things like depression and anxiety, yes, can be very effective.
Are there no? Kind of getting into that topic, is that a like a very selective thing of how it works for individuals, or is it shown to really have a mass impact on depression as a whole?
You mean like antidepressant medications?
Yeah.
It depends on the person. There are a lot of factors that have to be considered when prescribing antidepressant medications for somebody. The way they metabolize medication, the type of depression they have. So some people's depression is more numbing and sedating. They're more lethargic. They sleep a lot and so forth. So the appropriate antidepressant medication for those people might be something that has a more activating mechanism that helps them get over the lethargy and so forth.
Wakes them up.
Other people have an agitated depression, which looks like anxiety attack. They can't sit still and everything, but it's depression. So that would be that would take a different type of antidepressant medication. Some people are so profoundly depressed that they become psychotic, and so that's a different type of medication. And then there are the other factors. What's the dosage?
Yeah.
You don't start with a full dose. You start with a lower dose and try to work up until you get an effective dosage, because they can be dangerous. I mean, you can overdose and die on medications like that, but you want to find the dosage and the frequency and the type of medication that's appropriate for the individual. So it takes somebody trained.
It really is really individualized when it's coming.
And it takes somebody trained, not your primary care physician, who just because they have a prescription pad doesn't mean they should be writing medication, for mental, what we call psychotropic medications, things like antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety. Just because they have a prescription pad doesn't mean that they should be doing that, because there are a lot of other factors. It takes a full workup by a psychiatrist or by, in a couple of states now, trained psychologists. So a couple of states have prescription privileges for psychologists who've undergone extra training. But let me give you an example of the danger of just a physician writing a prescription. When Prozac was first sort of hit the shelves
Mm-hmm.
many years ago. It was the newest happy pill, and people were going to their doctor. They wanted this new miracle drug, and Prozac. It's an antidepressant medication. It works on a very specific neurotransmitter in the nervous system and has pretty specific actions. But then it got some really bad press, and in fact, it was on, I think, on the cover of one of the news magazines. I think Newsweek. This has been probably 30 years ago. That said, it was quote unquote causing people to become violent and psychotic and crazy, and causing them to do these horrible things. So it got a really bad rap. Well, part of what that problem was that it was being overprescribed. It was being prescribed for people for it wasn't appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you a scenario. Let's say person A goes to the doctor and goes to the primary care doctor and says, "I'm depressed. Can I have some Prozac?" The doctor writes a prescription, and the primary care doctor doesn't have the time or the training to do a full, complete psychiatric workup for medication. Yeah. Well, if this person has undiagnosed bipolar disorder, which is what's used to be called manic depressive illness, taking Prozac could trigger a manic episode. So if you give many of these antidepressant medications to somebody who is in reality bipolar, you're just not seeing the mania at the time. You're only seeing the depressive end. Mm-hmm. Okay. It can actually trigger a manic episode. What happens when people become very manic? They can become psychotic. They can become violent. They can become out of control. So that right there stresses the importance of having somebody who is trained to do these medication evaluations to make sure people get the appropriate medication.
Yeah, I agree. You were talking about some of the massacres and shootings that you kind of went into. What do you think about, especially the school shootings, like the shooters being on Prozac and like some of those do you think that they were misdiagnosed with it?
No, because most of those weren't impulsive. Okay, so for example,
like provoked.
After the shootings at Columbine High School, there was a lot of press given to the fact that they were on, at least one of the shooters was on medication. But somebody who is, let's say somebody who's in a manic episode, they're disorganized, they're impulsive. Mm-hmm. You don't hide mania.
Yeah.
Okay. These two young men set out to very methodically. They built bombs. They bought firearms.
Yeah.
They practiced in the woods. Okay, that is not
an episode.
Right, that's not an episode. That's not brought about by any medication.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying.
The conclusions, there were a group of psychologists and psychiatrists who did what's called a psychological autopsy of Columbine. Mm-hmm. And their conclusion was that they were probably emerging antisocial personalities. And I had read that in one report. And I don't. It's probably not a good idea to get into a discussion of personality disorders because there's pros and cons about those. Mm-hmm. But that was their conclusion, that and somebody who's an antisocial personality disorder, they may or may not be psychopathic or sociopathic. But that was where they were leaning toward with their report. Mm-hmm. That these, but this wasn't an episode. This wasn't a manic episode. This wasn't caused by. It wasn't caused by. Medication.
Yeah. So
also
do you
wasn't
think,
caused by being bullied.
Do you think that like the sociopaths and psychopaths kind of overlap a little bit with the depression? And what I mean
you can have a mood disorder on top of sociopathy or psychopathy.
So how would you pick out those outliers in the depression field. I feel like those are just cracks they're just falling through easily.
It's we all probably know people in our lives that are probably sociopathic or psychopathic. They're really hard to spot, and they don't come to the attention of the mental health field unless they've been court ordered for treatment, court ordered for evaluation, or they've been in and out of jails. I think jails see more sociopaths than psychologists do. Is my guess.
Yeah, 'cause most of them like would recognize that there's something wrong and hide it that way.
Sociopaths, psychopaths, no, they don't think there's anything wrong.
That's what it is. They don't recognize that there is anything wrong.
The Ted Bundys of the world.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know who Ted Bundy is. He was a serial killer. He was executed in Florida, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, long time ago. He didn't think there's anything wrong with him. He was the ultimate con man.
Yeah.
Very charming, very personable. The jailers all liked him. And he clearly fit the profile of somebody who is a psychopath.
That's just crazy.
See how complicated it is?
Yeah, it's that's why, like I said, we try to have these longer form conversations on these.
And I tell my students, especially when I teach abnormal psychology, is this is not, don't go diagnosing your in-laws or your roommates, because it's so very complex, and it takes years and years of training and supervision and education and we still don't know everything about.
Yeah, we're just on the brink of finding out the stuff that we need to know about all of this. But yeah, I think we're coming further now than we've ever been, though, with it. Becoming more aware and informed of, like you were saying before, just how connected they really are, that there's no real connection between mental and, physical pain. It is just...
Pain is pain.
Yeah.
Pain is pain.
Exactly.
And, the origins, I suppose, if you're curious, you want to know the origins of it, but the point is deal with the pain.
Exactly.
So if I've got a client in my office who is suffering from depression, I suppose it's nice to know if which it's sort of a chicken or egg proposition. Did the chemical imbalance occur first? Because there are those people who are clinically depressed because there are neurotransmitter deficiencies.
Yeah.
But does that make a difference? Is it because of their brain chemistry, or is it because they they're going through a terrible divorce and they just lost their job? Who cares? The treatment is the same.
Yeah.
Their experience of it is the same. It doesn't make any difference what the origin is. And even if somebody is suffering from depression because they're going through an ugly divorce and they just lost their job, the medication will help. Not by itself. I'm an advocate. If you're going to give somebody medication, they should also be seeing, getting therapy. Medication is fine, but it doesn't teach them the skills to deal with life's,
to get over the pain, to deal with the pills are helping the physical part, but the phantom arm, it's still there.
Right. And so it doesn't, so I laugh when I'm supervising, for example, graduate students or licensure candidates. Once in a while, somebody will want to run a test, because there is a test you can run to see if it's really the chemical imbalance is the primary cause. And what difference does it make? How's that going to affect your treatment? And they stop and think, oh yeah, you're right. So, I'm not going to put them through a test just to satisfy my own curiosity.
Yeah.
When I know that some medication and psychotherapy is going to help them.
How do you it's just so hard to do. But how would you go about the abuse of the antidepressants that are being given out? Like it's just such a hard thing to, because everyone can say that they're depressed. How do you pick out the liars that don't need it?
Well, they're not gonna. People aren't. You don't get high from antidepressant medications.
Yeah, but they still get abused.
Well, I don't know about that. Not in that sense, because for one thing, there are side effects.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for example, Prozac, it sounds like a happy pill and it's going to make you feel good. You know what the main side effect is that people deal with? Loss of libido.
That does not sound fun.
Right. So it's a choice between a happy mood or a sex life.
Yeah.
Okay, and for some people, yeah. So would you then want to go out and get start abusing Prozac?
And abusing.
I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think so.
I see what you're
Judging
saying.
by the look on your face.
No, definitely not.
When you realize what I just said, yeah, you just gave up any dreams of ever.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
It might be like overprescribed by a doctor, maybe abused that way.
Well, I think it's inappropriately prescribed by some.
That's
I think
a better way to put it.
Yeah, inappropriately prescribed, but yeah, I don't. It's not something that you go out and buy Prozac on the street. No, the big the big addiction problem now are the prescription painkillers.
Yeah, the opioids.
And we're seeing an uptick of heroin use as an offshoot of prescription painkillers. Because what has happened...
I think Vermont has a heroin issue right now, too.
The what?
I think Vermont has a big heroin issue.
There's a heroin issue all over the country.
Yeah.
And we're seeing an interesting... We've seen a shift in what the typical heroin user is. The typical heroin user is not the sort of the urban, living on the skid rows of the big cities, junkie like we see in the movies.
Yeah.
The heroin addicts, the heroin use has moved to the suburbs and the white middle class housewife types. What happens is they've become, I don't want us to get, we're not, and this is not an indictment of white housewives. Okay, but
yeah,
I'm talking more middle America.
Yeah.
Because they have become addicted to the painkillers, and the laws that have gone to an effect restricting the access to the painkillers, the price of the medications, and people are addicted. So what do? Well, they turn to heroin. They turn to street drugs.
Yeah. Not heroin. What? Maybe it was heroin. Was created to help the addiction of like morphine or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're. So it's something like that.
I think it worked pretty good to help with the addiction of morphine. They're not addicted. Yeah, you're not addicted to morphine anymore. You're addicted to this. It's better. That's just crazy.
Well, they use methadone to help people wean off of heroin, and methadone is addictive. The difference between methadone and heroin is the half-life. And the heroin has a short half-life, and it gets shorter with each use. Half-life is the time it takes for half the drug to metabolize out of your system. Mm-hmm. And so the shorter the half-life, the more addictive it is, and the half-life gets shorter as you use it. Well, methadone has a very long half-life, and so it's much easier. You use the methadone to wean off the heroin, and then you get weaned off the methadone, and it's much easier to wean off the methadone because of the long half-life. Yeah. Okay. But then what people do is this may be more information than you want, but people you can get methadone in liquid form, and so they'll do they can sell it. They'll sell their methadone on the street to try to get heroin if they're not monitored. And there's it's called a spit back, where they keep the methadone in their mouth, and then they get outside, spit it back into a cup, and then they go sell it to somebody.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's all these little.
That would be horrible.
No, that's how.
And people are buying that.
And that's just a little anecdote from my days of working with street drug addicts years ago. But I mean, it's a major addiction is a major public health problem.
Yeah.
And again, our heroin addicts are no longer fit the profile of what we used to think heroin addicts are. That they're much more mainstream, middle America populations.
So, what out of all the different things you've done with, suicide and all the different forms of the mainstream media looking into depression, what would you say is your opinion of what is the most common reason for cause of depression coming in? Like, do you think most of the time it is a media issue? Is it?
No, I wouldn't. No,
is it just so individualized every time?
I think it's individualized. I mean, people, people have different events in their lives. People are made to, they have poor self-worth. It could be their background. I mean, I think it's different. It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
They have poor coping skills for coping with disappointment or failure. They believe that their self-worth is tied up into, some. I mean, it's. I try to tell students that whether or not you get an A on a test says nothing about your worth as a person. I've never been able to really convince them of that.
Yeah, true.
But people, so I think it is individual.
Yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from. I remember my question now. So, do you think that this is just kind of right now coming around because of the technology that we have? Do you think that depression's been this big in the world since, way back in time before the technology, before all of that? Do you think that we're just now realizing it?
So you're asking, are there more depressed people today than there
were
basically
before,
and why? I think it's I don't know because it's so underreported.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, some people just don't know that they're depressed.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
And I've heard that from people. Well, I thought I was just lazy. I just didn't feel like getting up off my couch to, do my housework or to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'd just gotten lazy, and it turns out I'm depressed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes it takes a professional to help somebody arrive at that. I think it's. I think there's certainly much more awareness about depression.
Now more than ever, like
right,
saying.
And I think we do. I think we do. Social media, for example, and a lot of the organizations that are trying to make it awareness. There's some very good. For example, National Alliance for Mentally Ill, NAMI, which is a very good advocacy group for mentally ill, and they're making depression awareness. There's Mental Health America. We have a student group, Active Minds, on campus, and I think, and of course my own suicide prevention program, Project Compass, which stands for Community Partners Against Student Suicide. That's where the Compass comes from. I think we try to make people aware of depression and to, I guess, normalize it. That it is it's not a moral failing. It's not something to hide or be ashamed of.
Not a weakness.
It's not a weakness. It's not something you're doing wrong. It just is. Like the common cold, and get treatment for it, because it can be deadly. It can be fatal. If somebody is so depressed that they become suicidal, it can be fatal. So it's really important to treat it and to acknowledge it. And if you know someone, you see someone who you think is depressed, ask them about it. Talk to them about it. Ask them the magic question: are you thinking of killing yourself?
Yeah.
You have to be that direct, and get help. I mean, we have a lot of good resources on campus. There's a lot of good resources for people in the community, the Fort Wayne community. We have the counseling center on campus. We actually have 2 counseling centers on campus. We have, my Project Compass, and we do refer people. We have Park Center, Parkview Behavioral Health, and the Bowen Center in Fort Wayne, and they're all. But I think as more people become aware of depression and suicide, more people are going to be willing to get treatment. They're going to see that it's not. Again, it's not the stigma that people make it out to be.
Yeah, I mean, just growing up, you hear just people say, "Oh, he just fell off his rocker. He's just going crazy," or you talk about
he had a nervous breakdown, which was the catchphrase for anything like that.
Just those kind of things. It was like you were saying. It was basically said as a weakness, like they just had too much. I guess it just got too weak and broke apart. Well, I mean, it's kind of what happened, but it's not a weakness. It's just you're right that they broke apart. Yeah, but it's just. It's like they had an infected leg and let it go.
Well, people used to be ashamed of getting cancer. Cancer was, years ago, cancer was this horrible secret that you kept because it was assumed that, they'd done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this goes back to the days where, the centuries and centuries ago where people didn't understand. They had a very poor understanding of physical illness, and so they believed that it was evil spirits or that kind of thing, that you broke a taboo, you did something wrong.
Yeah.
And we still have that mentality, unfortunately.
But
definitely. And so cancer was seen as somebody broke some moral rule, and they got this horrible disease. And nowadays, we have, cancer is talked about. People talk about being cancer survivors or that they've got cancer or whatever. And I'm hoping, I would like to in the future see, mental illnesses to go the way of cancer. That is something that people accept and talk about, and let's get treatment and and that kind of thing.
You think we're heading that way with it?
Well, I'm hoping we're heading that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, yes, it is better now. I mean, again, we're sitting here talking in your living room in student housing about depression and suicide,
exactly.
trauma and mental illness. So, I mean, that's something that wouldn't be happening a few years ago.
Yeah,
so.
You're right. You're right. And so that's what I say. I think we are coming we're coming along a little bit with it, but it's still, like you're saying, it's still not something that, like you say, some people just don't even know they're depressed. It's just crazy to think about.
Or they think they're crazy, oh my God, I can't, why can't I sit still, or why am I so fearful all the time? And they don't have a label for it. Sometimes just putting a label on it helps.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's just anxiety. Okay, I have an anxiety disorder. I'm not going crazy.
Mm-hmm. What is anxiety versus depression? What is the?
They're 2 different things. Depression is a mood state. It's a mood disorder, and anxiety is anxiety, and it's a little harder. I guess it's probably a little harder to describe than depression, but it's a state of arousal, sympathetic nervous system arousal, that has fear attached to it. And so there are different types of anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
There's just a generalized anxiety, somebody that my mother would have called a worrywart.
Mm-hmm.
Not even sure what that is, but that's what somebody who worried all the time.
Yeah, I've heard that term a lot.
There's panic disorder, where people have panic attacks for no reason. I mean, they just have something triggers, they have these horrible panic attacks. And then there are the stress disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. It has people are depressed with that, but it's a very, very strong anxiety component. They're easily startled and
really?
so forth. So I mean, anxiety, and you can have anxiety and anxiety disorder and depression at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
That's crazy. How do you treat that?
well, there are therapies. There are therapies that are very effective in
Really?
treating the anxiety disorders. Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy is very. It's a particular approach.
What is that? Exactly?
Cognitive behavioral therapy has to do with adjusting your thought patterns, your thinking, your beliefs.
Would a word like neuroplasticity be? the same
Well,
thing as that?
neuroplasticity just simply refers to the brain's ability to rewire itself.
Mhm.
But what cognitive behavioral theory, the sort of one of the basic tenets is that you're not depressed or anxious because of the things happening in your life. You're depressed or anxious because of the messages you're giving yourself about the things that are happening in your life. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you're depressed because you got fired from your job, a cognitive therapist would say, no, it's not because you got fired, it's because you're telling yourself that you're worthless
Mhm.
as the result of getting fired. So what they do is you can't change the situation. I mean, you're fired, you're fired.
Mm-hmm.
You don't change the situation, but what we do is we change the person's thinking about the situation.
Mhm.
Which it is the kind of the root of the problem, anyways.
Well, yes. And so, but there are some techniques for some of the more behavioral techniques for some, some anxiety disorders. So, for example, agoraphobia, a fear of, having a panic attack out in public. And these are people that don't leave their houses and stuff. There are some real clear behavioral techniques for helping them deal with that and
Mm-hmm.
getting people who have phobias, a dog phobia or whatever some of the phobias are. There are very specific behavioral techniques that are very effective in dealing with those. So yes, and yes, you can use medications for anxiety. Unfortunately, most of the anti-anxiety agents are highly addictive,
Yeah.
and you can become very dependent on them. And if you were to stop taking them, it would trigger your anxiety. So you have to be very careful with those. There are some antidepressant medications that do have anti-anxiety actions,
Really.
and so you would more likely give an antidepressant medication to somebody with an anxiety disorder,
Mm-hmm.
if medication's appropriate.
Yeah.
So what is your whole stance on antidepressants? Like, do you agree with them or would?
I think they're very effective. I think giving them by themselves is not. I think they should be given in conjunction with psychotherapy.
Okay.
It will help people, sort of help people on the short term, get some motivation to then learn the skills to help deal with the disappointments in their life, help deal with the situations in their life, helps them, helps them with some of the more vegetative signs of depression, like lethargy and eating problems and sleeping problems and that kind of thing, so that then they have the motivation and the energy to make the changes that's going to help them overcome the depression.
See, I don't agree with it a lot because I feel like a lot of times doctors don't, like they said, like that one dude you said previously said it's just a serotonin problem, and that doctors just hand out prescriptions saying that it's just a serotonin problem, not
Well,
actually
that's right.
attacking the actual issue, which is whatever traumatic experience they're experiencing is what's making them depressed. But they're just telling them, take these and you'll feel better, and then, but then what you gave your answer was psychotherapy, which I feel like that makes way more
Right.
sense to do, but I feel like
That's
that's not happening a lot.
and that's the problem. And this is my bias, but that's the problem I see with primary care physicians writing prescriptions for antidepressant medications or any psychotropic medication. First of all, they don't do a thorough medication evaluation to see what's really appropriate for the person.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, there's no psychotherapy attached. And so I have sent I have sent many a client to psychiatrists for medication evaluation because I thought they could benefit from, having some medication to help. But I'm also doing the therapy, so they have, and
Which I like that a little way better than just handing off prescriptions, because I know people who's been on it for years and are still on them and still are depressed because they're not actually fixing or helping the issue. That's what's wrong with them. They're just giving them these pills, saying that you'll feel better, but really it's whatever they're thinking about that's happening in their life.
Right.
Or the way they think. But.
And a lot of people can then, after, maybe 6 months, a year, whatever, on antidepressant medication, psychotherapy, they can then be weaned off the medication. Because they've had a successful therapy experience, they've developed the skills, needed to sort of cope with the crap that life throws at them sometimes.
Versus them deciding kind of when they're done with them. Because you can just refill them as needed, kind of. Or there's no, like you said, no psych evaluation after this pill order's up.
Right.
There was no evaluation at all. So that would, like you said, it would definitely help with the over abuse of it completely. So you said you were working started the suicide prevention program here at Purdue.
Purdue, yes, we have to.
At Purdue.
That's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah,
you have to stop and think.
Yeah. And so what got you started on that? Why did you want to get going with that?
Well, clearly, there have been student suicides.
Yeah.
And this was going on way back in, I think it was 2011. There were a couple of student suicides that, and I realized there really wasn't any programming on campus. There were a lot of students that were distressed by the student suicides, and people were asking, what could I do to help? I should have known something, and all of that kind of survivor guilt that people experience. And so the grant opportunity came along. There was an announcement out of the federal agency that did the grant. I wrote the program, and I got this grant that basically was seed money to start programming here on campus. And so
that's awesome.
We do educational stuff. We do the gatekeeper training. We and we do referrals. We will do assessments. I have a questionnaire thing that we will just, at campus events, we'll just randomly select students here. Would you like to fill out our questionnaire and see how you're doing? And we end up referring students that otherwise would have fallen through the cracks. They were walking around depressed. We've had students hospitalized directly from a campus event because they scored so high on the depression scale. They were clearly suicidal, needed to be in a hospital, but they were walking around campus. And if we hadn't stopped them and said, hey, why don't you fill this out, they may have suicided.
Yeah.
And so we get them to help. We'll walk them into the counseling offices over in Walb, or we'll have them give an appointment depending on how depressed they are. And we do that. We've been doing that for 6 years now.
Really, that's fantastic. It's a great program. Like you say, it's clearly effective already. And
I've got an internship program now. People can get 3 credit hours in a semester to work with the suicide prevention and learning about suicide. It's a class, so there's assignments.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is outreach. I have students. We'll set up a table like in one, like over in Kettler, one of the buildings, and have information about suicide, and they stand there and educate people who ever walk by and come up. So we have a presence on campus that, we reach out to students and faculty and staff, and we've done some interventions too. So
that's fantastic. That's a great program to have. It's crazy that it's only been around for 6 years.
Well, yeah.
That's mind blowing to me that you basically just started it up.
We started it in August of 2012 when I got the funding.
Well, it's great you got the funding, and is it?
Helping kids and students?
Yeah.
Do you help just kids and students, or do you ever help faculty before?
Yeah, faculty, staff. Yeah.
That's good.
I think I asked you this already. Do you guys go outside of campus with it?
We
too much
we
into
actually
the
have.
community?
I mean, we've done things. We've been to some of the public schools at their request to come talk to students. I've been up all the way up to Leo Garrett, down to Homestead. You know, that whole length. Fort Wayne Community Schools, some of the other school districts around. So we've done that. We've been to churches. We've done assessments at some of the churches have the summer family picnic festival things. We'll go and do assessments there and out in the community. So yeah, we do that too.
You have to be crazy busy.
Well, it keeps me off the streets.
Yeah.
Keeps me out of trouble.
Well, kinda. Sounds like you're still out in the streets
Well,
helping
yeah,
helping
yeah.
everyone out there too. That's pretty amazing. I don't know how you have the time to do it. I sure as heck don't have the time to do much besides work and do this. It's not a whole lot. Maybe you're just way better at time management.
I wonder about that sometimes, but yeah.
Do you guys offer I know people can get like certified in suicide prevention. Do you guys offer like training for that and stuff?
Yeah, if you you do a gatekeeper training, if you take our gatekeeper training, we give you a nice certificate. You can use it on your co-curricular. But you, at the very least, you have a nice certificate that you have completed our Campus Connect gatekeeper training.
Okay. And how long are those classes?
It's a 3-hour class, in one shot. And what we do is, you learn about suicide at first, and the facts and the figures, and we dispel the myths. There's a lot of myths about suicide. One of the biggest ones, and the most damaging one, is people believe that if you ask them about suicide, you're going to put that idea in their head. And that's not true. It's already there, first of all. And second of all, a lot of people are relieved that somebody finally asked them, because they're but it's a question that has to be asked. And so we do some role playing exercises, and we give people the chance to repeatedly ask that question: are you thinking of killing yourself? Until they're comfortable with it, so that they can use it. And we've had a number of situations on campus where students have actually done intervention. Somebody had a roommate, and they asked them that question. They were concerned about their roommate, and are you thinking of killing yourself? And the roommate says yes, and so they get a friend to go call for help, and they sit with them, and then they get them into the hospital and get
That's
help.
awesome.
So we've had students saving other students' lives as a result of our gatekeeper training program.
Yeah.
And when is this available? Because it's definitely something I want to get certified for.
Okay.
I've been thinking about for a while.
Okay. Well, I will. If you email compass at pfw.edu, or you call the Compass office 481-6778 and leave a message, and we will let you know when the next trainings are. We schedule them when we get enough people that are interested in them. We schedule them, but we're going to have some over here in housing, for sure, and we're going to be training some of the RAs to be trainers, and so you'll be able to you'll those of you that are in housing, student housing, that's coming up. Okay, but compass at pfw.edu or 481-6778, and people can always find me as well. And when we get, like I said, when we get enough people, then because we need enough people because of the interactive component, then we'll schedule a gatekeeper training.
Yeah.
But it's really important.
Yeah.
And you'll see my interns around on campus, this fall, handing out information and that kind of thing. And we have an office in the basement of Kettler. It's in G82, G80 and G82 is where our offices are, in the basement of Kettler, back over behind the bursar's office where you go in and then you can go around, the hallway behind. So
what classes do you teach?
well, this fall I am teaching abnormal psychology and psychology of women.
What level classes are those?
300.
Okay.
And in the spring I am teaching cross-cultural psychology and tests and measurement. That's all about all about psychological testing, and then cross-cultural psychology.
That's cool. Do you have a favorite class or favorite thing you like to teach, or?
I like all my classes that I teach, or I wouldn't be teaching them.
Yeah.
I figure.
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't let me teach them.
Yeah, you're probably right.
That makes sense.
So I've been teaching university classes for a long time, so I've taught a lot of different classes, but it's what I'm teaching this. And I just got done teaching summer session, summer 1, so.
Do you have summer 2 classes?
No.
What do you spend the majority of your time doing? Like Project Compass or school-related stuff like teaching, or?
Well, it's all about school-related stuff.
Okay.
But I do research. I teach. I do research. I'm the chair of the Purdue University Institutional Review Board, so we approve all human subjects research that any of the Purdue campuses are doing, and I have to fit in my writing my research to submit it for publication in the middle. But I spend a considerable amount of time on Project Compass, and I put in a lot of hours. Here it is on a Sunday night. I mean, and I'm available to do stuff like this. So this is what I do.
It's nice.
It's not
It's
a
nice
9 to
to have you
it's
on
not a
here
9
also.
it's not a 9 to 5 job. It's
Yeah.
I understand.
Out of all the stuff that you've done, like with the Columbine and the 9/11 attacks and the traumas of that, why do you keep going back to college campuses? Because you enjoy teaching there, and
because I enjoy the teaching and doing the research, and I still do clinical work.
yeah,
So, and I've worked in a lot of different settings. I worked in I worked in hospitals, in general hospitals, but I've worked in psychiatric hospitals, but I've also worked in general medical hospitals. I did my pre-doctoral clinical internship to get your doctorate in clinical psychology. Besides doing a dissertation, you have to do a 1-year full-time internship, and that's where you get your clinical training. I did mine at the old Cook County Hospital in Chicago.
Oh.
That's what most people say. I was there the year that they filmed the Harrison Ford movie, The Fugitive.
Really?
And I was there the morning that they filmed him walking across the street to the front of the Cook County Hospital. If you'll watch that movie, it comes on every once in a while, or you can probably get it on
I love that
Netflix.
movie.
And if you see when he walks in and you see him pan down this enormous building, and then there's the blue canopy that says Cook County Hospital. I was there that morning walking across the field in front of the hospital to get over to my building. I had just gotten off the train to go to work.
That's crazy.
So I got to see that. Yeah,
That'd be pretty neat.
But anyway, so I've worked in a couple hospitals in Denver. I was on the faculty I was a clinical instructor for the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and I was a consultant to their HIV/AIDS clinic for several years. I had private practice. I worked victim assistance work for the Denver Police Department. I was a paid contract consultant for them, and I did victim assistance work. So we responded to the scenes of crimes against people, and so I've done crisis intervention at 4 a.m. with a dead body still in the room.
Jeez, oh, peace.
So I've been to the scenes of homicides and suicides and unattended deaths, and that kind of thing. I've worked in substance abuse treatment. I worked in substance abuse treatment for years. I've done substance abuse research here. So I've been around.
Yeah.
I've done a few things.
You've experienced a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, what kind of ripple effect of trauma has it had on you?
Well, that's interesting because we used to talk about that when I was doing victim assistance work because, once in a while we'd have a team member that would have to actually quit because they couldn't handle the trauma of, dead bodies are messy, and the suicides, especially the gunshot suicides, gunshot to the head suicides, are really messy, and the bodies are quite frequently there when we go there to try to help the cops. We help with the crisis intervention and getting the family, and while the cops are, the crime scene guys are doing their thing, and sometimes we end up doing interventions with the cops. You get the young cops that have never seen a really gruesome scene like that, and but and those of us that survive that kind of thing are really good at compartmentalizing. You can sort of put that in a box and put it away, and we deal with it and we talk to each other about it. It's real important to talk to people about it and that kind of thing. So I've come out really. I just have one of those sort of constitutions that things don't faze me that much, and
I feel like you were definitely meant to do what you're doing.
I was sort of built for that kind of. I was built for crisis. I've told colleagues they should study me because I've had several colleagues in the crisis intervention field that we've talked about this, that we actually get really calm. In the more chaotic the scene gets, the calmer we get, and that's just sort of the way they're built. I think there's, I've talked earlier in our conversation. I talked about your physical body, and I think my nervous system is just one of those that handles that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's clearly people that handle it, and there's people that don't. The people that don't is the ones that you work with, and the people that do handle it are your colleagues. There's got to be some people that can handle it a little bit better, or at least figure out a way to handle it better.
My son, I've got 4 kids, and my son is a paramedic, and he's the same way in a crisis. He just something just kicks in. I've watched him in a crisis. I've seen him at the scenes, and he's a firefighter, and then he became a paramedic, and then now he's a chief paramedic for a fire department, and he's a flight paramedic. So he's one of those guys on helicopters as they're keeping people alive as they're transporting him to the hospital.
Yeah. And
he does the same thing. So there's something physical, and apparently it's genetic in my family.
Yeah.
That just makes some people are just built for this.
Which makes sense. Like, say you have to be. What time we got? Oh, I think we can probably wrap it up here. What do you think?
Oh, that was a really fast.
Fast hour and a half?
Hour and a half.
Yeah,
that went really fast.
That's kind of the plan of the hour and a half. We'll get into good topics and cover good material a little bit. Kind of goes a little faster. Or at least for us, anyways. We hope for the viewers, too, I guess. But, yeah, so this was a good episode here. I hope to maybe have you back sometime and talk about some different topics later on down the road. It's definitely eye-opening. I never would have dreamed, like you were talking about, the ripple effect of trauma. I never even knew anything about that or was exposed to that at all. So, like I say, I'm always excited to learn different things. But that was this is
it was nice having you on.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
It was a lot.
Okay. All right.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
My other students will tell you I could talk about this stuff all day long. In fact, sometimes I do.
Well, that's what we'd like to hear.
And they're busy trying to take notes and keep up with me. So
yeah, I imagine. It's a wrap.